It's almost comical, the amount of crunch that's associated with that. Like, I don't even think I could talk that loud if I had to. Hey bakers, Martin here in the studio today to show off the versatility of pan de Cristal. This is this open structured bread that so many of you have come to love. It relies on the superhero power of bread flour. Today we're taking it into a different direction and we're making sandwiches out of it. Come along for the video. I love bread because there's not a bunch of messing around with like 20 different ingredients and the prep and the blah, blah, blah. I mean, come on. The beauty of this recipe is that, look, we got all the ingredients. Oh, I forgot the water. Literally one of the easiest breads I've ever written in terms of the mix. It's so easy and requires so few ingredients. But here's the thing. Anytime you use fewer and fewer ingredients, you increase the value of two things. One, fermentation, and two, the quality of those few ingredients. So in this case, as you know before, I'm using this superhero. It's bread flour. It's the thing that's going to allow this pan de Cristal, which is 100% hydration, to come together, build strength, and produce a loaf that's as open structured and beautiful as what we're going to make today, right? So don't underestimate the quality and potential that's in this bag. We need it, okay? Okay, 500 grams of flour in the bowl. And then we'll get some yeast in. It's just a little bit of yeast because we've got so much fermentation. And a little bit of salt. 500 grams of water in the bowl. And this is the part where you're going to say, Martin did me wrong. Because this bread, there's no way it's going to come together, right? There's no way that this stuff that looks like pancake batter could ever become that crispy, open structured loaf that I saw in the picture, right? In time, because of the strength of bread flour and because of the way that gluten forms in the presence of water, right? All these little relationships are happening and the dough is going to gain strength right here in the bowl over the course of time with some help from folding, which will help to organize things. So I'm just using the spatula until I have a dough which is homogeneous. Okay. That looks pretty happy to me. What a mess though, look at that. Zero structure, yeah? Zero. And it looks perfect, which is kind of funny. Okay, so into the pan I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil. The olive oil that's in the recipe doesn't go into the dough, it goes into the pan and eventually makes its way into the dough. But you'll see what I mean as we fold. Having that oil in the pan will aid the dough to release as we watch it gain strength. So tablespoon of olive oil into the pan. And then the dough gets poured into the pan. So messy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cover it. We're going to cover this and let it rest for 20 minutes. Over the course of the first couple of hours of this dough, we're going to fold it a lot, right? Every 20 minutes we're going to come back and do a fold. So the recipe link is below, just as a reminder. Down there there's also a bread schedule, a schedule that you can follow and it will sort of guide you through the folding process, okay? So 20 minutes, we'll be back. I'm going to cover this. Make sure you cover it. Use a pan, whatever you have. Just make sure it's covered. We'll see you in 20 minutes. I'm going to go do some dishes. Maybe make some lunch. Hungry, Martin, hungry. All right, so we're back for the first fold. Let's see what's going on. And it's doing exactly what it should be. There's basically just a puddle of dough here. There is no structure still, but watch this. So with a wet hand, always with a wet hand, use the magic water, right? I go into the dough, I grab a corner, I'm not really grabbing, I'm sort of scooping it with my hand and I'm just lifting. And you can see that there's a little bit happening, right? There's a little bit of structure happening. Just gonna work my way around 8 or 10 times, and look what happened. Dough. Incredible, right? There it is. First fold. that's the bowl fold. I even did a little bit more than what I might normally do just to show you how that dough is coming together. But you can see that we're on our way to having something that will rise and have that beautiful open structure, again, due to the power of bread flour. That extra protein really comes in handy. So we're gonna leave this for 20 minutes and we'll come back and we'll do the first in a series of coil folds. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we did our first bowl fold 20 minutes after the mix, and now we've had an additional 20 minutes and we're gonna do a coil fold. So wet hands into the dough, and look at that. Pretty strong. Pretty strong already.
After this first coil fold, you'll do 3 more at 20-minute intervals, and then the dough will rest before the divide.
So this dough has had 2 hours after we touched it last, but honestly, it's had a little bit more than that. It's very well risen, it's ready for the divide, and what I would say before we actually do the divide is that there's more flexibility in this recipe than you may think there is, right? So after I last touched the dough, or since I last touched the dough, it's been more than the 80 minutes that the recipe says. It's been closer to, honestly, like maybe, I don't know, 100 minutes, maybe even 115, something like that. So, you know, hour and a half, maybe even almost 2 hours. Since I last touched it, it's okay. The dough is fine. Similarly with the final rise, and we'll talk about that when we go to load in the oven, there is flexibility there. You don't have to set a stopwatch. I would say just watch the dough. Does it look light and sort of marshmallowy? Yes, then good, it's ready to go. So let's go ahead and divide this thing. I start with a lot of flour on the top surface because I just don't want it sticking to me. And then I'm gonna use my bench knife. You could use one of the flexible ones, you could use a metal one, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that I release it from the sides of this sort of, you know, from the pan, from the proofing vessel. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little bit extra flour down just so that it doesn't stick, right? And then I'm gonna invert it gently onto the bench. And if you just wait, it'll come. Don't push it. Voila, no big deal, right? And I'm just looking to see that it's not stuck to the bench anywhere. I think it's good. You might see some olive oil flowing over the edge a little bit. It's okay. Okay, so now a little bit more flour on top of the dough so that when I go to cut it, it doesn't stick to my hands or to the bench knife. So if you've seen the other Pan de Cristal video, you know that the way that I cut it is into 4 pieces, right? And they're 4 sort of rectangular shapes. Today, for our like ultimate sandwich bread, we're gonna cut it into strips, more like almost like baguette pieces, rather than into squares, okay? So I'm gonna start with a middle cut. Again, trying to be accurate, but also try not to worry too much. It's okay. This dough is very forgiving. As long as we're gentle, that's the one thing that I would say. Just try and be as gentle as you can. And now I go and I cut both of the pieces in half again. So looking to see roughly in the middle. And if you need to, as you cut, if you need to pull a little bit of that dough back so that you can access the portion that needs to be cut, then do that. You can check and see that it's not adhered to the bench. It's still floating, which is what we want. And I can lift it and just set it over here. In that setting process, I want to make sure that I do as good of a job as possible not to deflate that, okay? As I'm moving it, try not to deflate it, right? Be super gentle, okay? So if it's a really dry day, you may want to loosely cover those, right? You may want to loosely cover those, but most of the year, I think it's better actually not to cover them. Let them form just a slight skin, and that will actually help with their structure, especially in summer months. I don't cover them because we have so much ambient humidity, right? So these are now going to rise for about 2 hours. If it's more than that, it's okay. If it's 3 hours and they're not sort of pancaking too much, go for it. The longer that they rise, it will improve that structure slightly. There is a point of diminishing return, so I would say around 2 hours, maybe up to 3, depending on how your dough is moving. Just look for the signs that I've told you about. Look for bubbling on the surface. This dough is already headed in that direction. I think it's going to be good. I think we're going to have a beautiful structure. So I think that probably in 2 hours it's going to be ready to load. So be thinking ahead, plan the bake, get your oven preheated, and before you know it, you'll be baking. Okay, so it's been a couple hours since we cut these loaves, actually maybe even a little bit longer than a couple hours, like 2.5, and that's okay. So now it's time to load, and there's not a lot else to say. I'll show you a trick though. If you don't have a peel that's big enough for this, you can use the underside of a sheet tray. So just simply slide the loaves onto your sheet tray, and then you'll load them onto the stone like you would normally, just sort of removing the peel, as it were. So you can use the back of the sheet tray, very helpful as a tool. There you go, let's load. They don't even look like the same doughs that went in the oven, right? I mean, they obviously are, but they jump so much. And this thing, I can tell just by feeling it that it's like a cylinder of air. Really, really nice. And so let's talk about it for a second. I like this level of bake. I know that when I have those dark colors with this bread, that it's gonna be crisp, right? If I bake to sort of a blonde level of bake, it's not gonna have the crust firmness that I'm looking for, okay? So I like that level of bake, but in your house, you do what you like. What I would say is that these take a couple minutes less than the normal pain de cristal recipe to bake, so just keep your eye on it. So let these cool. They don't have to be dead cold when you cut them, but let them continue baking. Honor that sort of like 5th quarter of the bake, okay? Let them coast for a little while. Okay. I'm excited to make a sandwich out of this, but before we do that, we should probably cut one of these things open and see what it looks like on the inside. Not that it really matters at this point, because I can tell that it's really good bread. Well, it looks like pain de cristal, right? It's this glossy translucency right in here. You see that? That's why people call it glass bread, is because it almost looks glassy, right? Okay. But we're not here to gawk at the bread, we're here to eat the bread, right? Enough looking. Let's make a sandwich. So, one of my favorite things to do with this bread is to toast it for just a second under the broiler, right? I'm talking like a minute or so. And then I come back and I rub it with some raw garlic. Let me do that. Okay. Toasty bread. So you could do that in a toaster too. You don't have to use the broiler on the oven. You can just put it in the toaster. Now here's my trick. And I didn't make this up. This is an old trick from Italy when they make bruschetta. So raw clove of garlic, and you just use the toasted bread to sort of grate the clove. Putting that raw clove onto the warm bread, it immediately sends this like aromatic garlic cloud up into your face. Here's a little tip. You just rub a little bit of that behind your ears and smell wonderful. So I roasted some eggplant. I didn't bother peeling them. They're pretty small. I've got a little bit of very, very thinly sliced red onion. Then I'll get some tomatoes on here, a little bit of coarse salt. I like coarse salt. Not only is it salty, obviously, but it's crunchy. I love that crunch. A little bit of Vermont Creamery goat cheese. Okay, a little bit of olive oil and a little bit of this balsamic. And it's a glaze, so it's a little bit thicker. I like that as opposed to the regular vinegar, because the regular vinegar would kind of like run off. We'll press it down. You think this is going to be crispy? Okay. Man. The ingredient combination that I'm using here is not the point. The point is that we have the best vessel in the world for delicious sandwiches. It's this pain de cristal, the ultimate sandwich bread. I've made a couple easy toppings, simply roasting some vegetables and then adding a little bit of salt and pepper, some fresh onion, some goat cheese, a little bit of balsamic glaze and some olive oil. These are things that can be kicking around, but you make it your own. Do what you want. But the main thing here is make this gorgeous bread, and you can have so many different ways that you can build a beautiful sandwich. I'm gonna have a bite, and then I'll talk to you in a few minutes when I'm done chewing. It's beautiful. Onion comes through a little bit. The garlic is there. Obviously the bread is really, really crisp, and so every bite has that texture. It's almost like, I remember when I was a kid, someone showed me the trick of putting potato chips on a ham sandwich, you know? layer the ham, layer the mayo, whatever else, and then you just pack it with potato chips and then you eat it. This is like that bread, but on the outside. So crisp, so crunchy, and so much flavor. So this is a pan de Cristal sandwich bread. We appreciate you watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe. When you go to look for the recipe, just surf on down the page a little bit. It's right there in the comments. You can click on the link. Thanks for coming along. This is Martin and Tucker in the studio saying, happy sandwiching.